You are listening to Preconceived, where we examine the preconceptions that shape how we view the world and the paradigms by which we live our lives. Hey everybody, I'm Zael Mednick and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. If you're enjoying watching these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Preconceived Podcast. If you prefer listening to your podcast on audio, you can subscribe on any platform that's out there. On today's episode, we're talking about the sexless relationship. Sex is an important part of many romantic relationships and many people's lives, as we all know. But as commonplace as sex is, we really don't talk about it openly. Even more, we tend to not talk about how sex often changes during the course of a relationship. It's not uncommon for sex to be a primary focus of a romantic relationships in the early days of a couple, only to go by the wayside as time goes on. So how does that happen? What is a sexless relationship? In this episode, I spoke with Dr. Jane Greer. Jane is a marriage and family therapist, sex expert, and author of 5 books. She's recognized as a leading national expert in sex, love, and relationships. She's appeared on Oprah, The Today Show, CNN News, Anderson Cooper 360, and she's been interviewed for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. She was a delight to chat with, and I'm really excited for you to take a listen. So please enjoy this episode of Preconceived. Hey everybody, I'm Zael Mednick, and welcome to another episode of Preconceived, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jane Greer. Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to join you and talk about preconceived ideas.
Absolutely, and we were just talking beforehand. I never talk about Survivor on the show, but you got my juices flowing, and you know that I worked on the show Survivor as a doctor way back, and you're a huge Survivor fan too, so we just nerded out a little bit about Survivor, which was fun.
It's completely awesome because if you are a Survivor fan, then to meet anybody like yourself who has the authenticity, who's the real deal, who's not just a fan, but who knows it and has been a part of the whole experience. It's really, I'm just like so excited to be talking Survivor with you and to hear not just your experience, but to know that you were like on the front line and you were there as a doctor. I mean, what could be better? Boy, do you need a doctor on the front line in Survivor each and every episode. From the minute they jump off the boat and dive into the water and leave all their worldly goods behind, it's from fingers.
You're making it sound more heroic than it is, but the excitement of it for me is absolutely matches what you're describing. It was a blast, and yeah.
Well, I have to say, I think you're underplaying it because, frankly, anybody who goes out to Survivor for any length of time is a hero in my book. To get, to disconnect from the worldly comforts and look, we're doing it now in this pandemic, and people are struggling being on house arrest at home without being able to go out and have their worldly, their typical life experiences. And that's what Survivor is, but really in boot camp, people are home and working from home and or try to do everything in their lives under their roof to stay safe. And Survivor was all that without any creature comforts whatsoever. In my book, anybody who ever was on Survivor is heroic.
All right. Well, I'll take it, even though I wasn't roughing it in their conditions, nonetheless. But
so you were in it. You were steeped in it.
So Jane, we're talking today about the sexless relationship. What do you define as the sexless relationship for somebody who hasn't heard that term before?
Yeah, so a sexless relationship is when there's no sexual intimacy that is taking place with any kind of regularity for an extended period of time. And at least one person is disappointed, unhappy, and upset by it. There are sexless relationships where people stop having sex and live together with compatibility. They'll say it's like I'm living with a brother or sister, but nobody cares. They've reached a stage of life. They're at a point in their lives where they don't care if the relationship works. For most people, when the sex stops occurring, at least one person is usually very distressed by it and experiencing it on a personal level very intensely.
And how common is a sexless relationship? Because there's obviously huge variations in sexual frequency. And like you said, a lot of that is going to be dependent on, or all of it's really dependent on the two people involved. And some people might be okay with having sex less frequently. Some people's norm might be more frequent. But how frequently is it that one person in the relationship, if not both, are unsatisfied?
Yeah, it's really frequent. And, people would think that the preconceived idea is that, oh, this would happen in relationships where couples are together a long time or they're older. And that is not the case at all. I work with a lot of people, many young people just starting relationships in their early 20s, who are coming in and saying they don't understand it. Both men and women are not initiating sex. They're not looking for sexual continuity. They're not looking to be sexually connected. It's really prevalent. There's a sexual anorexia that prevails, that goes on for a lot of people. And it's really disappointing to so many people who are finding themselves unexpectedly and unwittingly in a relationship with a partner that they love, that they're just not connecting in an intimate way.
I think it's important to hear you say that it's not just something that happens as you get older, because that is a huge misconception, and that's something that people, I don't think, talk about enough. And there's almost this stigma, I think, to maybe express that disappointment sometimes, because it might be viewed as, well, sex shouldn't be the most important thing on your mind. You should care about your relationship for other reasons. But as I'm sure you agree, there's nothing wrong if you're unsatisfied with your sex life in a relationship and you want to address that and be more proactive about it, right?
Absolutely. And not only do you want to address it, but rarely does sex go easily for two people. Usually it's a relationship it's an experience that has to be navigated, addressed. People need to define and express their mutual needs. People need to learn their partner's desires, what pleases them. People need to learn when their partner is in the mood or not. And because there are so many points at which one person becomes angry or upset, disappointed, or turned off by what their partner has done or hasn't done, there's a withdrawal and a retreat. And suddenly, a lot of times, sexless relationships spring up from initiating sex. So, for example, one person initiates sex with their partner and they're not in the mood and they say no. And so their partner is a little upset and a little disappointed and they feel a little rejected, but okay, fine. And they come back a night later, a week later, whenever, and they initiate sex again and their partner's still not in the mood, or they say no again. So a couple of things start to happen. The first is most people take that very personally. Most people, when their partner says, no, I don't want to have sex, experience it as a personal rejection of them, that they are undesirable, they're not attractive. That's the first thing. The second thing is they get angry that their partner is like controlling the purse strings. What do you mean? You say no and we don't have sex? And then with anger, they go into a standoff. They say, well, I'm not going to initiate. I'm going to wait for them to initiate. I'm not putting my head on the chopping block again. So now, if you have two people that have a different level of desire, the person who had already initiated wants to have sex, let's say 2-3 times a week, and their partner is good with 2 times a month. That's fine for them. Nothing wrong, just different. So if they only want sex twice a month and their partner who wants sex 2 or 3 times a week has now withdrawn and retreated, waiting for their partner to initiate, and they're not initiating, a lot of times they're lying there in bed doing and just gripped in resentment and frustration and anger and becoming more steeped in the conviction that they are not going to initiate sex. And they don't know that their partner is fine. They don't even know that their partner is even unaware that they're so upset or disappointed. And the next thing you know, they've withdrawn and their partner is fine with 2, 3 times a month, 2, 3 times every other month. And you've got two people in completely different places. One person who's seemingly okay, and the other person who is furious and feeling rejected and just not sexy.
The person who is feeling rejected, I mean, obviously a lot of this comes down to communication and communicating what are you actually feeling, because that probably is a problem with a lot of situations. But the person who's feeling rejected, when you're chatting with them, how do you tell them to maybe frame that a little bit differently so maybe they don't look at it as a rejection?
That's a terrific question. And it goes to helping people, which I do in all facets of their life, but learning not to take things personally, not to personalize other people's limitations and other people's needs. So that, for example, if your partner has a different level of desire than you, and or they have a headache, and or they don't feel well, and or they have a pressure because they've got a big presentation in the morning, so sex is the last thing on their mind, it's not about you. It has nothing to do with finding you attractive or desiring you. It has to do with just not that night or just not then. So learning to understand and appreciate what's going on in their partner's lives and distinguish between they don't want to be with me as opposed to they just don't want to be sexually active right now is really important. Learning to make that distinction.
And then for the person who, some people are, I'm sure people who are listening to this lie on both sides of the spectrum in this equation. Very few people, there's not this exact neutral point. But for the people who are on the side of, well, I just don't understand why they wouldn't want to have sex. Sex is good. What's going on in the mind of the person who doesn't want to have sex so frequently? Is it as simple as reduced libido, or I imagine there's other factors as well that are common for why people don't want to have sex as much?
Absolutely. And so for some, it's reduced libido, but for some, it's simply a matter of the equation is energy. If you're dealing with a kid, if you're dealing with a demanding boss, if you're dealing with an early meeting, if you're dealing with a sick parent, if you're dealing with an illness yourself, if you're dealing with problem financially that you're not working out and you're stressed and you're anxious, that energy is going to cut into your desire. And you're not going to be thinking about sex. And by the way, the only place sex is easy is in the movies. In the movies, you see somebody, you meet them, you want to rip their clothes off, and you do. And women are immediately excited and hot and aroused. And sex can happen on beaches, on floors, on desks, everywhere. But in reality, I had one gal who came in and she said, so we tried sex outside the pool. We were in the pool and then we were outside. It was awful. Fingers wrinkled from the chlorine, and then the bugs, the ants were getting me on the pavement, and the pavement was hard. It was awful. There was nothing arousing or exciting about it. The truth of the matter is, sex is like dancing. You have to learn how to not step on your partner's toes. You have to learn how to lead and follow. You have to learn each other's rhythms, and that takes trust, and that takes getting to know somebody. And it's a matter of, a lot of times people don't just get into bed and find themselves so aroused by their partner. Particularly, you know, people get comfortable with one another. When you go out on a date, when you're in the dating phase, you dress, you wear your best clothes, you make sure you shave your legs, you're groomed, you do all that. When you're raising a family, raising children, or living together, and you're with the same person, you don't go out of your way at night to look your best or present yourself in your most attractive. You go to bed. And so, and also, sex serves a different function for women and for men. Sometimes for men, it's a matter of just relieving anxiety, and it's quick and simple. A lot of times for women, it's much more about the emotional connection, the emotional bond. And so it's not, oh, let's just turn on the stove and put the cake in the oven. There are a lot of steps that need to take place in order to bake in the oven and get the cake to rise.
Embedded in what you just said there is these different expectations maybe about what sex is for different people. And we'll take the example of males and females. So if for males, many of them is, yeah, it's just this quick thing, an anxiety reducer, it feels good, doesn't necessarily take as much time often for a man to reach orgasm as it does for a woman. That's not all the time, but is that a false statement to say?
No, that's a true statement for the most part. And even what I hear from a lot of women, even with vibrators, um, the problem is women like and need to be aroused. They don't start off at the same point of entry as most men do. And men are sort of at a 3 or a 4, and women are at a 1 and a 2. And as a result, there's a lot of disconnecting that goes on for women when they're with their partners. And they'll say to me, I don't understand it. He was giving me oral sex. I should love it. I didn't feel anything. Or I was thinking about this. Or, we were using a vibrator. It wasn't working. Because by the time they were at certain erogenous zones, there was not enough warm up. So the receptivity and the experience of what was going on, they weren't excited enough to really enjoy it.
So how do you navigate that then? Because I could see if it's already this thing where people are sometimes, let's use the word tired, or as you said, they just don't have the energy for sex. But maybe they're trying to say, okay, I'm going to put a little more energy into sex. But for one party, that amount of energy might be less than the other amount of energy because it takes them different levels to get there. Do people build up sex to be this thing that requires more energy than it should? Or is it kind of true that it really does require a lot of energy having sex?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 2 things. The first that I want to say, going back to if you're not in the mood for sex, one of the things I encourage people to do always is to say, to help you not personalize it, is to say, look, I'm exhausted. I can't even do a quickie with you, but let's plan for Saturday. So let's look to, tomorrow night, I'll be clear. Give your partner another time when you're going to be available that they can look forward to being with you. And that helps them tolerate the disappointment and know that it's not about them, it's really about you. So that's the first thing. To your question, how do you navigate it? It's really about communicating. And you have to be able to talk to what turns you on, what you like, what will get you hotter. And again, I encourage people to speak in terms of what they like and what they want more, not what they don't like and don't want. Because there's nothing quicker to turn off a partner than saying, I don't like it when you go so fast, or I don't like when you put your tongue in my mouth, whatever it is. All you have to do is criticize your partner's moves, and they'll stop moving. Which that's another way to douse a sexual relationship. I mean, what one guy told his wife he didn't like the way she French kissed. She didn't French kiss him for 20 years. She wouldn't tongue him at all. And I can go on and on and on with how many people have been turned off by a seemingly, like for example, one woman, she finally had an orgasm and her partner was so thrilled. And he said, and now can you imagine when you have 2? So she read that as, this was not good enough. Oh, I just had an orgasm. That's not good enough. Now I have to have 2. Now he was talking about, wow, this is so great. You had an orgasm. You can even have more pleasure. That's how he meant it. But she heard it as her one orgasm was itsy bitsy. And, it was not amount to enough. It's you really have to be very aware and mindful of the words you use, the words you choose, and the way that you express your desires to your partner, so that it's all in terms of, here's what you can do that will excite me. Here's what you can do that's going to get me aroused. Here's what you can say that will turn me on.
In a long-term committed relationship where you'd, on some level, probably naively expect that the communication is great, which is a super naive thing. As I say it, I realize, but how much pressure is there to perform, even in the comforts of a long-term relationship, for a man to feel like they need to have their partner orgasm, or for a woman also to feel like I need to orgasm? Is that a thing that causes a lot of fear amongst people?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. You're right. You're absolutely right. Because here's the deal. Being in a relationship with somebody, getting married, the objective, it's all about pleasing your partner. You're with somebody and you want to please them and make them happy. That's pretty much the gist of it. You want to do thoughtful things. You want to say nice things. You want to remember them, consider them, and make them happy, i.e., please them. What typically happens in relationships is partners start to refrain from telling you what you've done that makes them happy and pleases them. And they tell you all the things that you've done that make them unhappy and displease them. So most people walk around upset that their partner is not happy with them, that they didn't please them. They're frustrated, they're angry, just in the general scope of the relationship. And all of that carries into the bedroom. So now you're in bed and you're already feeling, Jesus, he was upset or she was upset because I didn't do this or this or this. Maybe I can please him with this. And the feeling is, I don't even know if I can please them in bed. And so men and women both experience performance anxiety. The men start to have a hard time maintaining an erection. The women start to have a hard time orgasming. And it's like any kind of anxiety, it only has to happen once before you have the, uh-oh, I hope that doesn't happen again. All it takes is one time. One experience of a racing heart and a panic attack giving a speech, you may become afraid of giving speeches. One time where you don't get an erection and keep it, or you just don't get an erection, sets the stage for, uh-oh, I hope this isn't going to be what happens every time. One time where you don't have an orgasm, now the thought's in your head, gee, I hope that doesn't happen again. And so the pressure is built into a sexual relationship of pleasing your partner. And part of pleasing your partner is the pressure on yourself to show them that they pleased you. So it's like a double whammy. So, sex is like a lot of fun, but it ain't easy.
And I think, like you said earlier, it's not like it's in the movies. And in the movies, it is this easy thing. But in real life, it's not this easy thing. It's just, it's not as simple any way you slice it.
Right. And again, now I'm a little jaded because I'm a sex therapist. So the people in my office are always talking about what's not working. With that being said, having dealt with a lot of infidelity and a lot of affairs, I can't tell you how many times people are involved in extramarital relationships because they're not getting either the emotional or the sexual bonding that they're looking for with their partner at home. And many times they'll say to me, it's not even that I'm in love with this other person. I wish I could have this with my spouse or my partner. But the expectations and the demands and the residual anger, the resentment, the undercurrent of anger that flows into relationships cuts into that. And so, it's really important to stoke the flames, to work at your relationship, to talk about what you like, to figure out how to have more of that, to be committed to it. Life is very busy. You raising families, you're dealing with work pressures. I call it scheduled spontaneity. Sometimes you have to schedule sex. It's not, look, when you're dating, you have a date. You go out Saturday night, you're going to have sex. Like, you've got plans. When you're living with somebody, you think you're going to have sex, but a gazillion things can come up. My couple, sometimes they're looking to have sex and one of them is exhausted and they want to go to bed at 11 o'clock and they say, come on, let's go to bed, and thinking they'll have sex, and their partner's like, oh no, I've got 2 more hours before I'm ready to bed. They're not even on the same timeline.
Well, it sounds like communication, as with so many things, could help with a lot of problems related to sex. I mean, in terms of enjoyment, you might be, I imagine there are a lot of couples where there's surprise if they were to have an open communication and say, how do you feel right now? Like, are you, maybe a guy's expecting a woman to orgasm, and if the woman doesn't orgasm, he's thinking, oh, I failed, she's not happy. But maybe in the woman's mind, she's thinking, oh no, I'm very happy, I'm good.
Right.
Is it the kind of thing where people should communicate on a pretty regular basis and just
Absolutely. Absolutely.
have more
All
questions like, it's not strange to ask, are you good? Are you happy? Are you satisfied?
right. Not only is it not strange, it's helpful. With that being said, it's also important to make it to distinguish. Look, when you go out to eat, every meal is not a 5-course meal at a 5-star restaurant. Sometimes it's a coffee shop, a cup of coffee, and a donut. It's a snack. It's a little bit. Sometimes a partner's in the mood, you're not in the mood. I've had people that'll say, well, can I just look at your breast and that'll arouse me? Or can you just tell me a story? Or can you just help me get off? There are lots of variations for being there and sharing sexual space with your partner without having to always make it a long, intimate, loving encounter. And that's how you develop a sexual language with one another and a sexual rapport, and get to know each other's sexual needs. Sometimes it's going to be, hey, let's go out to a really nice restaurant. And other times it's going to be, let's go for brunch. And that's fine. You just want to make sure you're on the same page. And even if you're not hungry, a lot of times you'll go with somebody and say, you know what, I'm not hungry. You get a meal, I'll just order a little something. That works with sex as well, you know?
Like you said beforehand, you used the term, I can't do a quickie right now. It makes sense to kind of have those terms, that there's a difference between a quickie and there's a difference between having maybe that more emotional, passionate sex that you're talking about. Because if you're striving to have that emotional, passionate sex all the time, the intimidation of that and the expectations might prevent you from having it as much as you would.
Well said. You're exactly right. Mm-hmm.
So for people listening to this, I think communication is really important. I think understanding that people have different assumptions about sex and that we might often be having wrong assumptions about what our partners want and need. Averages, I don't think, are a great thing often because nobody's average, but people listening might be interested to know, what is a normal frequency? And I put normal in huge quotations for having sex. And I say that that's a double-edged sword getting into, because on the one hand, you don't want to compare yourself to the average. On the other hand, maybe it's validating for people to hear that maybe their expectations were out of sync with reality.
Right. So, again, it depends on how old you are. And even with that being said, 2 to 3 times a week for some people, 2 to 3 times a month for other people, once a month for some people. But most people like to try and have sex at least on a weekly basis, at least once a week. With that being said, every other week is fine for some. Some people look to have sex every other day, and that's great. Everybody has a different appetite and a different level of desire. Important thing is tuning into your level of desire and then sharing that and managing that with your partner, so that if they're not in the mood, you can masturbate and take care of yourself, and it's not a big deal, so that you carry some responsibility, as opposed to having this expectation that we're supposed to have sex every other day or 3 times a week, and then getting angry at your partner for not delivering goods, so to speak.
Well, Jane, you've given a ton of really valuable insight, and this insight is coming from years of experience dealing with people who are coming to you looking for help. So I really value the time you spent. Do you have any final messages you'd want somebody listening to this to come away with, who perhaps is struggling with their sex life?
Thank you. Yeah, the biggest thing the the thing which tortures people is feeling rejected by their partner, that their partner's initiating sex, and people get into stalemate a lot with it. I have to encourage a lot of the people that I work with not to stay angry and sit there and wait for their partner to initiate, but to extend yourself and say, look, I really want to be with you. When can we be together? To find out that it's not about you personally. And if it is, if there's something that your partner is, if they're angry with you, they don't want to have sex, if they're upset with you. I had one couple, she didn't want to have sex with him because he never changed his flannel shirt. She was disgusted. And she was turned off. And it was as
I'm
simple
wearing a
as,
flannel shirt right now.
as long as you're changing it, your partner's going to be happy. The point being is that sometimes it's small things like the wives will say, or the women will say, you got to shave. Being comfortable can be read and interpreted as, you just care about me. It's not important to you that I'm turned on or that you look okay for me. So grooming, small things like letting your partner know, like, I love it when you shave, or I love it when you put your hair up or let your hair down, whatever it is, to not get stuck in your anger at feeling rejected and taking it personally, and talk to your partner and sort it out with them so that you get your sex life back on track, because it's really easy for a sex life to get derailed. It's like a skid. All you have to do is hit the brake too hard and the car is out of control and you're going to crash. But if you turn into the skid and deal with it and address it, you regain control and keep the car going directly. Same thing with your sex life. So deal with it.
Well, thank you, Jane. Is there any place you want to direct people where they can learn more about you?
I would love to send people to my website, drjanegreer.com, www.drjanegreer.com.
Perfect. And I will put that in the episode notes. And it's been an absolute delight chatting with you. And thank you so much for taking this time, Jane.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Have a great day.